This is kind of interesting. There's it's a mountain called Zaphon. Right, so this is Isaiah chapter 14. And we're going to be in verse 13. So this is a prophecy against Babylon. Sometimes people will try and take this one to be about Satan, but really this one was essentially about Babylon. And the reason, sometimes when you read Hebrew literature, you realize they use statements like this for people all the time. So when it says you've fallen from heaven, a lot of times people take that as meaning it has to be Satan, because who else would have fallen from heaven? But they use metaphorical sayings like that for people all the time. It's David says, "My bones were broken in misery," but maybe not. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Maybe he didn't literally have all of his bones broken. It's a way of expressing extreme agony. Because the Bible didn't say anything about when he was hiding in the wilderness, anybody getting to him actually and breaking any of his literal bones. I think it's a way of saying that he was stressed beyond belief, kind of thing. Yeah. So when it says that you've fallen from heaven, it's not necessarily saying that this was literally someone in heaven, because this is the literal interpretation of this is he's talking about Babylon. So Isaiah is going through because he's kind of prophesying that God is going to use Babylon later to destroy them. He's got his prophecies about Assyria also, but Babylon is further down the road, about 100 years after Isaiah, but he's prophesying against them that God will use them against Israel, against Judah particularly, but because of their pride while they're being used, that God is then going to judge them also. And so that's kind of what this passage is it's kind of talking about the fall then of Babylon, because Babylon was strengthened by the Lord to be an agent against Israel, but in their strengthening they became prideful, and so the Lord said he's going to judge them too. And so kind of an interesting phrase, he says, "You are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn, how you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low." He's talking about the king of Babylon. "You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, above the stars of God, I will set my throne on high." So he kind of got into this claiming to be God kind of thing. So I think that's the irony of what Isaiah is saying, you've fallen from heaven, because the king was saying that he was deity. That was something that the pharaohs and different kings would say, is claim that they were God. And then so when their nation is destroyed, it's kind of an ironic, you've fallen from heaven, I see, kind of thing, He said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. And so that far reaches to the north. Does your Bible have any note at the bottom?
Yep, Zaphon, yeah.
Zaphon. So the mountain of the north.
Sacred mountain of the Canaanites.
Yes. So Zaphon is a mountain in the north. And what today would be like the border between, I want to say, like Syria and Turkey, so north of Israel. So this is the promised land. You've got Galilee region here. During the biblical time, you had kind of Aram was here, so that was the Syrians. Then the Assyrians kind of came in and wiped them out, and then moved on into Israel as well. And then up here is Turkey in these regions, like modern-day Turkey. So this Mount Zaphon is kind of right on the border between Turkey and Syria. I almost wonder if that's where the ISIS stuff is taking place in some of those regions.
Like along the border of Turkey and Syria.
Yeah. So that's where this Mount Zaphon is. So Mount Zaphon was the Canaanite Mount Sinai, if you will, right? So this was where they thought that their gods, Baal particularly, resided, right? And so I want to say that there's even a story of the Babylonian king here finding out about this and desiring to make this a stronghold where he would have a throne and that kind of stuff. Because, this is supposedly the mountain of the gods. What better place to put one of my own palaces is right on that. So that's kind of the background here of this Isaiah passage. So when you know that history, the king of Babylon finds out that this is a Canaanite city where the gods lived, decides he wants to put his own throne there, kind of makes himself to be a god. And then the Lord then brings judgment on him, kind of fills in the background then of this story a little better. How you were fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. How you were cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reach of the north. And so that's the background kind of behind this, is this kind of Syrian area. So I think what's kind of interesting about that is this is the mountain of the north, right? So this was a pretty important area during biblical times. We don't hear about it as much because there's references to the mountain of the north and that kind of thing, but we don't necessarily get the name Zaphon too often. And so a lot of Christians probably wouldn't even know what that is, but it's a large, probably I want to say it's the largest mountain in that whole part of the world there. And so it's called the mountain of the north. And so in a lot of biblical prophecy, particularly like Daniel, when it talks about the king of the north, this is what they're talking about. This enemy that eventually attacks the king of the south and is not friendly here with Israel either. A lot of times people associate the king of the north and they think Russia, gets associated with that. But it's interesting, there literally was, when it's talking about the north and the king of the north and this mountain of the north, that it is this area here. That was a well-known reference to the Canaanite religious center of the world, right? The mountain of the north. King of the north then would be the person coming from this zone. And so it's kind of in that time period, I think a little more well known that when you're talking about the mountain of the north and the king who comes from the north, that they are talking about this region here, not so much Russia. I don't know if they know anything hardly in Bible times about Russia. So when they're talking about this, they're actually talking about this area here in Syria, which is interesting for nowadays times because you kind of see they got all kinds of crazy people coming out of that region even now. That's a hotbed currently, But it's just kind of interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Them becoming, an established enemy up there. So whether it's now or later, they become even more established, perhaps, something, I don't know. But either way, it's just kind of interesting that when we're talking about the north, we don't necessarily have to go all the way to the far north, to Russia. In their world, it was this Canaanite mountain that was up here, right?
They probably had no knowledge of Russia, that area from there then.
Yeah. Zaphon in Ugaritic, which is a language that was used back then, is translated as Hadad. If you remember, that is the name of David's enemy all the way through. So David fought against the Arameans, the Syrians here, quite a bit. So in his battles there, in fact, this was some of the people. Hadadezer, yeah. That was David's big enemy. So Hadad is Zaphon. And so that mountain there is Zaphon, and that is the name of the king of the north during David's battles. So the famous king of the north that David had to fight against, Joab had to fight against them in that one major battle. There was a major battle that Joab fought, and the way the story went is he told his brother, you take half the army, go to this side, I'm going to take the other half, and if one of us begins to lose, send people to help with us. That major battle was taking place up here against them. So kind of interesting that this means Hadad, and so you kind of see Zaphon, the mountain of the north, being easily associated here with the king of the north. Then there was also a Ben-Hadad, was another one of these kings up there. So it seems that maybe they took this name as kind of a royal name because this was the mountain where their gods came from. And so it seems that they've taken this almost as a royal name. So when it says the king of the north, there's a big connection with all of this and this region here being the Baal stronghold of the world, right? Compared with Israel, Mount Zion, Jerusalem. So you've got Jerusalem down here, which perhaps is what he's talking about when he says king of the south, right? You've got the two mountains. You've got Mount Zion and Mount Zaphon. And you've got a king coming from here and a king coming from here. And it's almost a picture of the times of David, that David was the king and the king of the south was the good one, right? So in the stories of the prophecies in Daniel, the king of the south is the good king. The king of the north is the evil king. And so perhaps this is a foreshadow, because Daniel obviously takes place after David, but perhaps this battles of David coming and fighting against the Syrians is a foreshadow of whatever this is that Daniel is talking about to come later. So kind of interesting. David's battles from this mountain where the true temple was versus the Baal temple up here. And so you kind of get that kind of picture. And so I think that's the best way to understand what Daniel is talking about. He's not necessarily maybe talking about these exact same regions, I don't know, but I think this is the template for understanding Daniel's prophecy, is these regions here.
And there are some people up there who classify themselves as Syrians.
Right.
And these Assyrians are Christians.
Right.
And ISIS tried to kill all the Assyrians.
Yeah.
But interesting that they're still, even though
The same groups, yeah.
same group.
Well, because they one of the areas that they were destroying was Nineveh, the ancient Assyrian capital. So that first major city, one of the first major cities that ISIS targeted, was they were blowing up historic Nineveh, and kind of going up in that area and destroying it. Because the Syrians, which is the ISIS area, and the Assyrians were longtime enemies. Even though their names sound similar, they were enemies. It was the Assyrians that wiped out many of these people. And so there's a reference in Isaiah that I was reading today that I thought was kind of interesting. It talks kind of about at the end, it talks about there is a road, there's a highway at the end between Egypt and Assyria going through Israel, and that Egypt, Assyria, and Israel are all considered God's people. I think it's kind of a reference to that 1,000 years of peace. So I probably should have done a little more research on this, but here is my theory, unless I can prove it wrong, that Egypt is Ham, Israel is Shem. And I need to check on Assyria. But them being north very well might be Japheth. So it could be when he's saying Egypt, Israel, and Assyria shall all be my people, that it's a reference back to after the flood, the three main groups, that all three of them are welcome, in the 1,000 years of peace. So, kind of an interesting part there. So let's go to Psalms 48. This is another reference to the mountain, Zaphon. So Psalms 48:1, it says, "Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God. His holy mountain, beautiful in elevation, is the joy of all the earth. It is Mount Zion. In the far north, the city of the great king, within her citadels, God has made himself known as a fortress." This one doesn't quite capture as much as some of my other ones. But the idea that he's trying to go after is he is comparing Mount Zion with the city of the north, right? And he's trying to say that Mount Zion is the true city of the Lord. This version here doesn't quite capture.
The NIV says, like the heights of Zaphon is Mount Zion, the city of the great.
Okay, so that one actually says Zaphon.
It does.
This one does. So what he's trying to do in that, so now that makes a little more sense when you hear like the heights of Zaphon is Mount Zion. What he's trying to say is what the Canaanites are saying about Zaphon, that it is the place where God dwells, is actually true of Jerusalem. That in the temple there is where God actually dwells. And so you have running through that culture would have been a very clear in their mind contrast between Jerusalem and the true temple and Zaphon and the Baal temple, which is why it was so egregious all the way through. The battle was always between Yahweh or Baal. And you've got the two mountains there, and Israel kind of is the valleys in between these two mountains. And so almost makes me think, because today we're talking about Shechem and the two mountains there, and Shechem in the middle, and that one is blessing and one is cursed. What that was in Joshua's time, now in David's time, you literally have Zion and Zaphon. And then in between is the covenant. You have to choose what side you're going to be. And so there's a mountain of blessing, there's a mountain of curse, and the Lord's presence is in between. You have to choose which one you're going to find. And so I think just off the top of my head, I wouldn't doubt, because you know how like the Bible things build on the next, so you had the tabernacle, but then you have the temple, and then you have Christ. That you see perhaps what was these two mountains in Joshua and Moses' day becoming Zion and Zaphon, meaning that whether you choose to worship the Lord or some other idol is, in their generation, the difference between blessing and curse. And in fact, if you go back in and read that, the biggest thing that would cause them to be on this mountain was if you no longer serve the Lord your God, is what it kept saying. If you turn from the Lord and serve other gods that are not really gods, then all of these curses will come upon you. And so perhaps the Lord was preparing them with the illustration of the two mountains for what life would be like under the kingdom for the next 1,000 years, of these two mountains vying for the worship of the people. Right? That's pretty neat. All right. Let's see what else we want to look at. All right. So let me go to. We talked about the 6-chambered gate. Did we do that last week? You remember that? Okay, so Megiddo. I don't remember if I did that. Did you guys watch the video? Okay, so maybe I talked about that. But either way, the idea is that they did excavations in Megiddo and Gezer and Hazor during the time of Solomon, and they found that all three of those cities have a 6-chambered gate. And in that 6-chambered gate, that was like almost like a style that only Solomon was using, because then we see that at some of the other cities that we know Solomon built at the same time. And so those were the 3 cities, Megiddo, Gezer, and Hazor, that the Bible says Solomon specifically built during his main building phase. When he was building the temple and when he was building his palace complex, it also has a note that he also built Megiddo, Hazor, and Gezer. And Gezer was given to him as a wedding present from Egypt. And so he built these 3 cities. And so anyways, this kind of confirmation that the same style that we know he used specifically in Jerusalem then shows up at those 3 cities at the same time, because kind of what we're looking at is confirmation of Solomon and David's time period, the United Monarchy, because there's not a whole lot that has been found specifically discussing them or anyone from that time period in that region. So it's not just Israel. We don't have anything from Moab or Ammon or the Philistines or any of those people during that time period. It's just too far away. Too many things were destroyed. And then the other thing is, in Israel, I want to say, I was reading something the other day that said even now they've only excavated 2 to 5% of Jerusalem. And so these major excavations that they've done, he said, are really just some trenches that they've dug in certain parts of the city. And even then, none of it is central, like where the palace complex or any of those things would have been. They're not letting anybody dig there much. Or if they are, they're keeping it secret. Like the temple book. Did you read that one about the temple with Bob Cornuke, where he goes to Jerusalem? If you haven't read that one, that's a good one. It's called The Temple. But anyways, in it, he's the same guy that did Mountain of Fire, Bob Cornuke, the one that was the police officer. He went to Jerusalem and...
I read that.
Yeah, of the Mountain of Fire, yeah. And then, so he's researching the temple. A lot of those things with the Fortress Antonia that we were talking about, and some of those things. So he's going there to research some of that stuff. And they actually, some of the site workers, he was asking them some questions, and because he kind of knew about Fortress Antonia and some of those types of things, I think that's what it was. I think he already knew some things, or somehow, anyways, he made friends with one of the guys there who said, hey, do you want to come see it? And he didn't really know what they were talking about, but he said, sure. And so they led them underground near the Ophel. And so apparently the government had been digging, the Israeli government has been digging under the Ophel for a while now, kind of in secret, because they believe that's where the real temple is. Solomon's temple not being Fortress Antonia, but further south near the Ophel, and that the Fortress Antonia was just a Roman fort. And so I believe they are now aware of that, the government is. And so they have funded kind of more private excavations underneath the Ophel. So anyways, he actually went in to what they are saying, those Israeli guys that were underneath there, were saying they thought was Solomon's temple complex. Not the temple itself, but some of the side buildings. And so they showed him a room that was in pretty good shape, he said, that still had the hooks in the wall, and the guys that were digging told him that's a room that they think that was used during Solomon's time period to hold the sacrifices. So they would tie the animals, the live animals, up in these rooms onto the hooks to kind of keep them in control. And so they've been able to find some of those kind of things. So it's pretty interesting book that he was able to go underneath there and see some of that stuff. And so they're actually digging all of that out. So
would that be the room that you were talking about usually was around the temple complex when you did all the storage?
yeah, so I don't know if it would have been the direct rooms around where they stored the treasure, but it would have been in that complex. So then next to that, then maybe you've got some other, maybe it was the direct rooms, but maybe there's another realm of rooms outside of that were the priests' offices and kind of things. So there was one then that was the other room that they uncovered and dug up that was in good standing still had a grindstone, I guess, where they would make the oil for Solomon's temple. That is still standing and in good shape. And so it's kind of interesting that they found quite a few of those things because I guess somehow they've been alerted to the fact that that's not really the temple, and so they're doing kind of some private. They don't want to make it public. It'd be a big uproar in the nation, but they're interested to see what's underneath there, and so they've been doing private excavations underneath the Ophel where they think Solomon's actual temple really was. And so anyway, he got to go down there and see some of it. But so other than those secret things, just in public excavations of what just secular archaeologists have done, it's a very small amount, and none of it being in the place where you would expect to find references to the king would be in the actual center core. I mean, farmers out in the countryside aren't going to have big, sculptures to the king or something in their farm. So the excavations that they're doing are more out in the fields where farmers and things like that would have lived. So, I mean, you could find something out there with David or Solomon's name, but it's not real likely. Like, I don't have anything at my house of the president, so if somebody excavated my whole place, you wouldn't find anything about the president, and that's typically how it is, And so anyway, it's kind of interesting when you read through that psalm there. It's talking about the mountain of the far north, kind of brings it into context and why he's comparing those two. So it's kind of interesting stuff. The archaeological part, though, of this six-chambered gate just kind of helps to confirm the fact that even though we don't have, that's kind of where I was going with this, even though we don't have much with Solomon's name, the Bible says during that time he built these cities and he built that city, and then lo and behold, you excavate them for that time period, and they share a common archaeological trait of a six-chambered gate, which was unique in that part of the world. Most people did a two- or a four-chambered gate.
Chambers, are those the rooms?
Yeah. So you'd have like a big gate where people would walk in, and then there would be rooms like this.
Yeah.
So as you're coming in. And so he did six-chambered gates. And so, I don't know what they would do there. Maybe they'd have shops or something, or in times of war, be it extra defense, that kind of thing. I know some cities would put judges, in the gates. City are wanting to get some kind of, judgment done. Okay.